Good evening once again. Today's study is the early years of Yeshua. Now, it's said that only 1% of churchgoers in the UK are Christian. So that you might ask, how did this happen? When once upon a time we blessed the world with ministry, we opened up most or many of the missionary works around the world. How did this happen? Well, it's like many things we deal with. If we don't respect it, pretty soon you'll find it's not there any longer. And over many decades this has happened to the gospel message. In our efforts to simplify it and to make it more acceptable, we have eroded its importance, and so that it begins to sound like a fairy story. And so that when we talk about babies in stables, 3 wise men, which used to happen on Christmas cards, we unwittingly water down the power of the narrative of the gospel, so that we now no longer have Christmas cards with Christ on them anymore. Now we see logs and robins and Santas and berries and all sorts of things, but we don't see Yeshua, Jesus, on the Christmas cards unless you specifically ask for them. They try to stay away from this thing. So what we're going to do today, hopefully, is start to deal with the early years of Jesus and put some of this stuff right. We're going to deal with the historicity of it. That's the history background of what is true and what is false. So let's begin. Now, the subject of Jesus' early years is something not many people have bothered to deal with, since there is not a lot of stuff to go on in the scriptures. Nevertheless, there is enough, I believe, to build up a picture of his early life. And this is a picture I think you will find does not match the traditional Christmas card stories and things that you hear and read about. We've become used to these things, but the Christmas card theology does not bear out the truth of all that is seen in the Bible. In order to draw out some of the truths, we need to use 2 of the gospel accounts. We will use Luke and Matthew. Matthew, because it was written to Jews. Luke, because it is the most, or seen to be by scholars, the most chronologically correct it's the most chronologically correct of the Gospels, and because it was written to Greeks, and because the Bible, of course, was translated into Greek. So we make a start by realizing 2 things about Matthew and Luke. So you need to have both your fingers in both things, because we're going to flick backwards and forwards to between Matthew and then back to Luke. So make a start by realizing 2 things about Matthew and Luke. Matthew tells the story from Joseph's point of view, whereas Luke tells the story from Miriam's point of view, or Mary. And that's what the world calls her, but her name is Miriam, if you want to get it right. And we begin by looking at the birth date. I'm going to read Matthew 2 and verse 1 to 7. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him.' When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, 'In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. This is taken from Micah 5:2. So, then Herod secretly called the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. So now we're going to switch over to Luke 2, 1-7. Now in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census to be taken of all the inhabited earth. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all were proceeded to register for the census, everyone to his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee and from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and the family of David, in order to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him and who was with child. While they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them at the inn. The floor's creaking. I'm frightened I'm going to go through. Yeah. Right. So, sorry? Just a bit of faith. Bit of faith, yeah. So Matthew 2:2. The wise men for the east were magi, in Greek or Persian word magoi, which means men who are expert in studying the stars. So how would they know where to come? Well, from the chart of the Medes and the Persians, which was probably taught to them by Daniel the prophet. We can read about that in Daniel 1:4 and 6, verse 2. I'll give you a minute to get these scriptures down. And 2, verse 46 to 48. And 6, 25 to 28. They would also have learnt of it from Balaam, who we read about in Numbers 24 and verse 17. And this is what it says in that scripture. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. A scepter shall rise out of Israel, and batter the brow of Moab, and destroy the sons of tumult. So Balaam was from Pethor, which was in Babylonia. And his name means destruction, as people worshipped Baal throughout the region in those days, and they took a name, because Baal was one of the gods of war, they took a name which means destruction. So we can read in Micah 5:2, where it says, But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler of Israel, whose going forth are of old from everlasting. So Bethlehem, the town is 5 miles south of Jerusalem, and this is the place where the prophecy was that Jesus was to be born. So, this was written in the 8th century BC. It prophesied the coming of Yeshua, the Messiah. However, Micah lived in Moresheth, and which is 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem. But now we're going to move on to Matthew 2:2. And here we read, the wise men saw the star. It says, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. We read here that the wise men come and saw his star. The Greek word here for star is asteros. And the star, the word means radiant or brilliant. This was his own star. And if we read that, we can read that in verse 9. It says, after hearing the king, they went their way, and the star which they had seen in the east went on before them, until it came and stood over the place where the child was. So, we see a little more than this star. The star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. The Greek word for young child is pedos. It's where we get the word pedophilia from. Pedo is a word for child. It means a child 1 year old. So, this is a different set of teaching probably than what you've heard. Back to verse 3, when Herod the king heard, it says, he was troubled. Now Herod was a paranoid schizophrenic who always thought someone was trying to kill him. It became a saying in those days that Herod's pig was much more safer than his son. And this is because he thought everyone wanted his throne. And Mark Antony appointed him the tetrarch in 378 BC. And while he was a tetrarch, he killed his son Antipater. All his sons were tetrarchs. He wangled his way into the system and got all the Romans to allow this to happen. Archelaus, another of Herod's son, reigned after his death, and he was even worse than his father. He killed 3,000 Jews in the temple compound during Passover. And Herod killed 3 of his own sons altogether out of 7 because he was paranoid that they were trying to take his throne. So, now we are going to move on a little bit and deal with the shepherds. There's 2 books that form the Talmud, the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Mishnah suggests that these were shepherds appointed to work for the temple flocks for sacrifice. The Messiah was to die just like these sheep at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, after which no sheep would be necessary again. And this is why he appeared to the shepherds first. Now, if we look at Matthew 2 and verse 1, it says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod, the king Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east. Now, in the first verse, we learn that Jesus was born. So many people over years have tried to predict the date. We can't get the accuracy of his date, not bang on, but we can get as close as we can. So it's possible to be accurate on this and his birthday as far as the date was concerned. He was born roughly in 4 BC, 4 or 5 BC, because that was the year Herod died, and he was alive at the birth, and the decree of Quirinius, which they came to Bethlehem for, in verse 2, happened in 8 BC. So it can be narrowed down even further, according to the Josephus. Herod left Jerusalem in 5 BC. He then went to Jericho and stayed there for a while till he died. Now, since the wise men had left Herod while he was still in Jerusalem, that would make his meeting with the wise men